Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Christian Horner's name already back in their headlines. Over the last 48 hours, Red Bull have officially removed Horner as a director of their company, and that is critical. Until this point, Horner was technically still employed by the organisation, but yet they'd simply demoted him from his role. Now, the tie is officially severed, and that's raised big questions as to where Horner might go next, and why this is happening right about now, and what sort of settlement they have formed. Ferrari, Alpine, or potentially Cadillac, three teams that might well be in the mix for this man's services in the very near future. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Not far from 82,000 subs on the channel at this point. Let's begin with the driver market because it's been gathering steam over the last few days. Mercedes boss Toto Wolff was on a boat with Max Verstappen, but he was also talking about Valtteri Bottas and suggesting, at least hinting, that Bottas's discussion with other teams are making some degree of progress. It's great to know that your reserve and third drive is as quick as it gets. Valtteri deserves a race seat. Hopefully this door is going to open. Watch this space, Toto says. Definitely implies that they're pretty confident that Bottas is going to find a seat somewhere. The most likely current option might still be Alpine, especially given that we think Cadillac might have decided on their driver lineup. So the big rumour the last couple of days was that at the Italian Grand Prix, so not immediately after the summer break, but shortly after the summer break is over, Cadillac are going to confirm their drivers for 2026, and we think Mick Schumacher might be their reserve. We really don't know at this point, but that's one of the rumours, that Mick Schumacher, in addition to his Alpine WEC drive, may get a drive in F1 just as a reserve drive spot at Cadillac. That's not an absolutely outrageous possibility. There are, however, plenty of other drivers in that conversation, and maybe it doesn't matter all that much. What really matters is who are the starting drivers going to be, and we think that one of them is going to be Sergio Perez. Planet F1 are reporting that this is near enough a fact at this point. Take it as you will, but Perez to Cadillac has felt likely for a long time. And then, this account, Bobby Parsons. So, a couple of weeks ago now, he tweeted out, an F2 champion is finally going to get his full-time opportunity. Again, you know, the validity of this account, you might question it. But still, Bobby Parsons then quote tweets this today with the egg timer emoji, or hourglass, whatever, implying that this is happening. Now, who is it going to be, right? Who is this F2 champion we're talking about? There aren't many options, and when we discussed this before, I think we were pretty unanimous in agreement that it's probably Felipe Drugovich. If it's anyone, it's probably Drugovich, and there have been other rumours to that end as well. So just over the last 48, 72 hours, it's becoming more likely that next year's driver lineup at Cadillac is going to be Perez Drugovich, which has, you know, some strength, some weaknesses, I would say, but also a hell of a lot of financial backing, I will say, is definitely a positive for that team if that's the route that they decide to go down. Elsewhere in the driver market, there has been discussion as to what Red Bull are going to do. They've got 10 more races this year. Frankly, 10 more races for Yuki Tsunoda to save his Formula 1 career. A lot of it has not been his fault, but if he doesn't improve, they will get rid of him. Honda isn't there to save him. Is he going to get another drive? Because, as I say, even if Tsunoda is an excellent option for Cadillac, they might just have made their choices, right? Like, if they want to sign the deals now so they can do a big song and dance about it, get Perez, get Drugovich, whoever they want to get Bottas, you know, Jack Crawford, Alex Dunn, these are other names that have been thrown around in the conversation. But Yuki's still under Red Bull's contract for now, right? They can't sign him now. What are you going to do? Wait until December, then sign Yuki if they drop him? You know, he's good, but he's not necessarily good enough to wait another 4 or 5 months to figure out what happens next. So that's the issue for Yuki, is that really Red Bull is his chance, is his opportunity, and he's got to execute. His last few Grand Prix have been shambolic. It's, as I say, not been entirely his fault, but he's not been performing very well, and it has raised questions on whether Isaac Hadjar is going to get that promotion. Racing Bulls say, look, we'd love to keep him, the kid's great, and he's done a phenomenal job. But if you look at the numbers this season, Lawson's actually scored a lot of points compared to Hadjar in recent rounds. They're nearly tied on points now. I think Hadjar's at 22, Lawson's at 20. And over the course of the season, Hadjar has been faster than Lawson in qualifying by a tenth, but only a tenth. It's, you know, it's kind of felt like Hadjar's had his number, which is generally speaking true. But over the last few rounds, Lawson has fought back, and the average gap between them is actually now very slim. Not to take anything away from Hadjar, really, it just shows that Lawson's done a good enough job, and maybe Red Bull will see this and think, well, maybe Hadjar's not exactly a generational talent, even though people so overuse the concept of a generational talent. Like, there can't be multiple generational talents of the same generation on the same grid at the same time. That's just not how that works, in my opinion, but whatever, that's a convo for another day. Peter Bayer says, I was joking, honestly, I'm sure that post-summer break discussions will start about 26, and they don't want him to leave, but if Red Bull wants Hadjar, then of course Racing Bulls have basically no choice other than to let him go to that team. But as I say, Lawson's recent performances have increased his likelihood of staying on the grid in recent weeks, and we'll see after the summer break if he can keep that going. The feeling is since Austria, Racing Bulls brought a new front suspension, that's made Lawson much more comfortable with the car than he was before that. Before we get to some of the Christian Horner stuff, just a bit on McLaren really. The other day, none other than Stefano Domenicali was talking about the future of F1, talking about potentially doing reverse grids, among others. One big thing he was mentioning, though, is the number of Grand Prix that we have. Currently 24. I don't think that's going to change. He does want to, unfortunately, increase the number of sprints. They did say at some point, no, 6 is a good number. Now we're talking about 8, maybe 10. Who knows if we're going to go pure MotoGP at some point. I certainly hope not, with every weekend being a sprint. But Domenicali says, look, it's not all about the money. Whether whether you believe or not, it's another question. But he does say the amount of Grand Prix is good. And look, in my position, making content about the sport, I'm down for more Grand Prix because it means not necessarily more. I think the number we currently have is good. What I mean is 24 compared to, let's say, 16, I think in terms of the actual energy around the sport is better in some ways. Obviously, it's better for the bottom line as well. What it's not better for are the poor mechanics and the engineers flying around the world every weekend doing back-to-back triple headers at the end of the season. There are human implications to this, but the more Grand Prix for the sport, kind of the better. But obviously, it's taking a toll on the teams. You've got certain individuals not travelling to all the Grand Prix. There's actually a talk, I don't know how true this is, but there was discussion that Red Bull, their pit stops haven't been as good this season, that Red Bull are rotating a lot of the pit crew because they're just unable to be there every single weekend. It's just a nightmare. So they've not maybe quite got that human resource stability that you would have otherwise. People like Toto Wolff are missing a half of a Grand Prix a season sometimes now to actually keep up with the demands. You've got a lot of the staff on, let's say, rolling situations where maybe they do 16 of the 24 races a season, 20 of them, something along those lines, right? So it's something McLaren and the other teams are obviously discussing with F1, because F1 would, we'd have 24 Grand Prix. What do they want to do? 25? Could they push it more than that if they can change the rules to allow it? Maybe. McLaren says they're open to that kind of reinvention, especially when it comes to stuff like reverse grids. At the end of the day, you've got the fastest car by a mile. Who cares, right? Do what you want in terms of changing the sport or the rules or the way the racing goes, whatever. McLaren are still going to win the constructors with a car that good. But obviously that's further down the line. Piastri versus Norris, the big battle for the championship this year. Piastri actually talked about how last year he was making things more difficult for himself than he feels like he needed to be in hindsight. And this year it feels like he gets along better with the car than he did before. Lando probably slightly worse than he did before. And all of a sudden, from Piastri being quite a way behind in qualifying pace last year, they're right on the money with one another. And it should be a very entertaining championship battle. But as Nico Rosberg is about to suggest, there is one thing that Oscar has that Lando does not necessarily. Now, he was also asked, what about this papaya rule, right? What are papaya rules? What does it mean when they come on the radio and yap about this stuff? And, basically making McLaren look like an unserious team, in my opinion. But I guess it's working well enough for them at the time being. He basically says, papaya rules is one thing. There's nothing more to it than just don't crash into one another. That is the only rule. Now, I will say, both of them have, I don't know if exactly broken it. I mean, Lando did break the rule in Canada, right? When he crashed into the back of Oscar. Lando was out of the race and Oscar did finish it. But Piastri's given it a good go, right? Like in Austria, as we know, that attempted lunge down the inside, the lockup nearly took out Lando's rear ends, and then nearly repeating the same trick in Hungary. maybe you'd say, oh, Piastri's calculated, he was just trying to scare Lando off the road or whatever. But look, Piastri and Norris are very well aware that this is the rule, papaya rules. Like, I don't really know why they would call it that, whatever. It's just a quirk of the way that McLaren do their business. But Piastri's like, look, all it is just don't hit one another. And both of them have tried it this season. Some have been successful, some haven't. And I wouldn't be surprised if that continues until the end of the year. Nico Rosberg has been quite critical of Norris, really, and also of Piastri as well. It was for a long time, Rosberg was pretty convinced Norris would win the title, as was I. Now I think most people, including myself, are definitely favouring Piastri, just feeling that he has a bit more going for him than Lando does. And even though Lando's won 3 of the 4 last Grand Prix and has done so quite impressively, and I think I've been impressed by Lando's mental fortitude, he's got a bit off social media, I think it might have helped him to some degree. I still feel like Piastri's, he's been the stronger driver of the two of them this season. Rosberg, as we know, reached out to Lando a while ago to say, hey, I've been through what you're going through, right? In 2014, 2015, Rosberg was having a torrid time mentally trying to cope with teaming with Lewis Hamilton and the implications of that. Rosberg gave his absolute all to the sport and to himself and to his mental and whatever. Like, he pulled out every stop in the book and still needed a bit of luck, but he pulled out every single stop in the book to try and win in 2016, got over his demons and won the championship. And Rosberg thinks that he could help Norris potentially do something similar, unlock something in his mind. Piastri, just temperamentally, isn't as, I'm not a psychologist, but, neurotic maybe? I don't really know exactly how to describe it. But Piastri is, let's say, less prone to those kind of mental doubts. At least it feels that way than Lando is. And for some drivers, individuals, that's only natural. But, when you're competing at the top level, it's something that obviously needs managing. Rosberg was there and Rosberg managed it. Now, Rosberg talked about Lando and says, you can't say Lando's a smidge quicker anymore. At some point, we need to stop saying that because there's no basis to that. Oscar's been extremely quick. I see them kind of on par. The championship is going to be decided in Lando's head. That's my impression. How solid can Lando become? I know that he's working on it. This year, Oscar's very strong, solid and fast. There are no weaknesses there. What are his weaknesses? There are no more, which is a bit scary for Lando because Lando does have weaknesses. And I think that's probably fair. I mean, in Hungary, Lando did a killer job making the one-stop work to win the Grand Prix. But again, his first lap was poor. It goes down to 5th. And he kind of got unlucky, I think, on the first lap, the run down into turn 1. But even then, he probably could have handled it differently to at least not lose the positions that he did. And it's something that Oscar doesn't really struggle with. If we look at some of the numbers this season for Lando versus Oscar, this is in terms of qualifying pace. Lots of these laps are incredibly, incredibly similar. There's some outliers, like in Canada and, of course, notably in Austria, where because Piastri didn't get his final lap in, we don't really have a good understanding of what the proper delta would have been there. So some outliers had to be excluded. But the data is pretty much even, right? Lando and Oscar have basically been just as quick as each other. The real outliers in Piastri's favour, which actually skew the data slightly to him being faster, is just because there's a couple of laps in here that Norris just made pretty big mistakes on a big run in Q3. China was not great for that either, Bahrain, Imola, Spain, for example, where, he just didn't have a good run that he put together in Q3. Oscar doesn't really struggle with that, as we know. Oscar will always qualify in top 4 bare minimum. And it's not like Piastri never makes mistakes, but he just makes them at a far lower frequency than it feels like Norris does. So that is Rosberg's perception on it anyway. We will see how time goes on. But this is the drama at Red Bull Racing. So they've got a car, it's not great, it has many issues in the slow corners, and report says from Duquesa here that the slow corner issue has not gone away. That RB21 was still very much struggling in Hungary in the slow speed, so you fast forward to some of the other slower speed circuits that are coming up, even let's say the Dutch Grand Prix at the end of the month, there are some corners in there that the RB21 is going to struggle in heavily, and even some of the medium speed corners. I mean, the McLaren is going to be so rapid around Zandvoort with the strength and weaknesses of that car right now. True, let's say the long left-hander kind of towards the end of Sector 2, McLaren's going to be killing everyone through there based on the strengths and weaknesses that they have, and it's not like Red Bull are going to be able to catch that up in many places, you would think, unless, Verstappen can make something happen through the first sector. But these were issues that Christian Horner no longer has to worry about. He got sacked from the team, but technically he didn't get sacked. And that was the big story of today, is that now finally he has been officially sacked. So just to break this down, when Horner was let go, they didn't let him go. They basically said, Horner is no longer in that role. His duties have been terminated effective immediately. So he's no longer doing those duties. But Horner was still part of the organization. It's not like they sacked him and he was officially no longer a Red Bull employee, because that's kind of difficult to do. He's a director of multiple Red Bull companies, right? Because there's multiple things going on there behind the scenes, especially the powertrains division, and it's all kind of legally, I imagine, kind of complicated. So yeah, they wanted to get rid of Horner, but initially, because they needed to make this decision, it seems quickly, they decided we've got to get rid of this guy, we're going to do it now, we're going to pull the trigger. Maybe part of it was inspired by trying to keep Max Verstappen around. Jos Verstappen's comments to Rosberg the other weekends might imply there's some truth to that idea. So Red Bull wanted to do it quickly, so they maybe didn't have time to work out all the complications, and there was a feeling that they might just say to Horner, well, you know, we're going to demote you from your role, you're not doing anything anymore. But on paper, he was still part of Red Bull technically. In order to get rid of him, you'd have thought they'd have to negotiate some sort of, basically a negotiated buyout when Christian Horner gets let go on some sort of period, maybe a gardening leave period or not, we'll see that in a second, but with some sort of money to basically get him to disappear off into the sunset and get out of Red Bull's organization entirely. That now seems to have been what's happened. So I think what's interesting is that, you know, just a few weeks after his official, let's say, termination, they have officially terminated his direction of the company. Red Bull Technology Limited, this is in on Company's House, on the 12th of August, Mr. Christian Horner has been terminated in that role, and also under Red Bull Racing Limited the following day. So Red Bull Technology Limited, Red Bull Racing Limited, Mr. Christian Horner is no longer a director of the company. So he's no longer part of Red Bull. It's now official. The tie has been severed between the two entities. This didn't necessarily need to happen now. They could have said, all right, Christian, whatever, I'm not going to talk to you. We're still going to pay you your salary or whatever, and then we're going to figure out how we get rid of you at the end of the year. But they've decided to do it now, and they've done it quite rapidly. And of course, it raises questions as to whether this is because Horner wants to go somewhere else, or because he is now free. For whatever reason, Red Bull decided to make this decision now rather than earlier or later. Now he's able to go potentially wherever he likes. This is when AMUS put out a pretty big article here. I think this is originally published, some of this a while ago, but there's some further discussion, especially on one specific team. So Ferrari is always going to be a conversation, but Fred Vasseur has kept his job. That's extended. There's talk that if chaos was to unfold, they might even look at getting Coletta from their WEC program rather than, let's say, bringing in somebody else. But they were interested in Horner before Ferrari. I wouldn't be surprised if they have that conversation again at some point. And knowing, well, as Schmidt here says at AMUS, while the waters have calmed since President Vinya's visit to Silverstone, you never know with this racing team. Peace reigns only until the next person stirs up the hornet's nest. So, Horner reportedly earns 15 mil at Red Bull. So anyway, that's the discussion there. There is a possibility at Alpine as well, but could Briatore and Horner work together? Horner would likely want, I would say, some sort of ownership of the team in the same way that Toto has at Mercedes. I think that one of the reasons why Horner eventually got the sack is because he wanted a similar level of integration and ownership in Red Bull. There was rumours that he wanted to break Red Bull off from the Austrian entity and basically get Nvidia and the entity in Thailand to fund it, and Horner would run effectively Horner Racing, which would be owned at least in part by him, and effectively break away Red Bull Racing from the Red Bull overall group. Now, clearly the Austrian's not very happy with that idea, and possibly this intention from Horner, if it is true, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is, eventually has led to his downfall, with the team getting rid of him when the time felt right. That's the Alpine discussion. Could he get ownership there? Would he get ownership at Ferrari? Good luck with that. But at least you get to work for Ferrari, I guess. The other point, though, is Cadillac. So this man is Graham Lodum. Not especially well known, really, in the, let's say, public-facing motorsport circles. But the latest discussion has been around Cadillac actually being plausible. Apparently this option was discussed behind closed doors at Silverstone. Horner would be the ideal man for the US racing team in a senior role. They too are building a team and an engine manufacturer in parallel. Horner's experienced this before. Current man Loden brings Marussia as a reference, but Horner brings Red Bull. Loden's face is only known to F1 nerds. Horner's face is known to the world. He would have more political weight in the scene. The project would receive a different level of appreciation. So what do we think about this? Is it plausible that Cadillac Horner actually happens now? Because there's interest from Cadillac, we think, and it makes a lot of sense that Cadillac would be interested in having Horner as the face of their team. Horner is now a free agent, effectively, right? He's been let go by Red Bull, paid off, presumably, to let him go. Where's he going to go? Good question. Would he go to Cadillac? I think Horner will bide his time, personally. I think Horner will bide his time because I think it's plausible that at the start of 2026, he gets offers from some serious teams. And who knows how well Cadillac are going to do. Yeah, Horner could go in there. He could definitely make his mark on the project. Maybe they would give him some sort of percentage of the team. And if he built it in the way that he feels right to do so, reuniting with Perez would be a very interesting one, wouldn't it? Let's be honest. If after all the drama there, Horner and Perez ended up on the same team alongside one another. Kind of doubt that in general, but it's not something to totally rule out because in terms of what Horner's motivations might be, Cadillac could align with that to some extent, but also Horner wants to win, right? He wants to be back at the top. He wants to be beefing with Toto and Zach Brown again. Is he going to be beefing with them at Cadillac? You know, probably not as much political weight as that might give General Motors and Cadillac in the sport. Something to think about. Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.